Welcome artists to this pastel painting tutorial I'm calling When Sunset Breaks the Rules. Join me in this lesson where I will share with you my simple trick for color temperature and how a low setting sun in a horizon can seem to break the color rules. And I'll be sharing so much more, including 2 products that I love for pastel painting. And be sure to stay to the end for my technique for twinkling stars. Welcome, and here we go. The main products I use in this lesson are 2 products that seem to be made for each other. Well, that's because they are. They're made by the same company. One of my favorite sets to recommend to newly budding pastel artists once you realize, hey, I'm a little serious about this, is the Sennelier 120 half stick set. Now, mine has been used a lot, but I've had it for years. And the reason I highly recommend this set for new pastel artists is the color variety and the value variety. You've got a large selection of colors and values in this set, and I love the quality of these pastels. They're very soft and vibrant, and you can get so many layers. Plus, I love the half stick size, perfect size for painting. I often break my pastels anyway. Now, the price is another thing to brag on. It used to be on Amazon for $125. That's like $1 a stick, practically. Now it's gone up a little bit, but it's still such an amazing value for this many pastels of this quality. The surface I'm using is also made by Sennelier. That's why I like to stress in this lesson why these pastels and the surface work together so well. They're made by the same company and they just apply like butter. So I'm using a dark sheet of Sennelier LaCarte pastel card. It's a favorite surface of mine. I'll talk during the painting demonstration about how I was a little uncertain about it the first time I tried it, but after you get used to it and learn a few tricks, you will find, hopefully, that it is a wonderful surface that creates a painting that has an impressionistic feel. I love that about this surface. I did use another set of pastels. It's a very affordable little set. It's a Paul Rubens set. It's available on Amazon. This is the 40 set, and it is really great for beginners because, again, it's affordable. And they actually feel a lot and apply a lot like Sennelier pastels. So I'll have all product links in the description of this video, along with a link to this gorgeous reference image from unsplash.com. The theme this month in Monet Cafe Studio and for my patrons is Down on the Farm, and I just loved these Haybales. I loved the combination of warm light from a setting sun and stars in the same scene, and I changed this image quite a bit. Now that lesson is over on my Patreon page where I talk about telling your story, taking a reference image, seeing the things in it that you loved, and making it your own. And getting that real-time lesson along with hundreds of others on my Patreon page is super easy and affordable. I'll tell you how to do that in just a minute. But I began with a sketch. Now, I like to do this often when I see a reference image I love, but I feel like I can tweak some things to allow the viewer into my story and what I see as beautiful. I will often add motion, compositional elements that create a stronger focal point, and much more. And before we start this lesson, let me ask you a quick favor. Would you go ahead and click that like button? It really does help YouTube to share this video more. Also subscribe, leave me a comment. I love that. And if you would like to become a patron, like I said, it's super simple and super affordable. It's only $5 a month. You not only support this channel, you unlock hundreds of lessons, many real-time lessons with full commentary. Plus, it's a beautiful family of artists. And my favorite part is I get to see your work. We have lots of contests and more. And now to transfer my sketch to my surface, I'm using a light gray Prismacolor Nu Pastel to get in my sketch. These are harder pastels. They're long rectangular pastels. They're great for beginner pastel artists as well, and they're great for sketching. And I'm using a dark blue sheet of this LaCarte pastel card because my scene is dark. I didn't want to have to darken so much, so often I'll begin that way. I'm not really doing an underpainting for this. You might hear me in a lot of my videos talk about that. This is going to be more about local color, but I will be exaggerating color and tweaking color temperature in this scene with a low setting sun to enhance a dramatic effect. And it's really not all that hard, so we're going to be getting to that soon. My sketch is very simple, just enough information to get started. And as you can see, I am exaggerating the clouds. In the reference image, the clouds were just a few of them, kind of middle in the image. And I wanted to enhance this focal energy and composition of a sweeping motion, pulling the viewer in the lower portion of the painting to the hay bale with those already there lines of convergence from the plow lines in the field. And so that's going to pull the viewer up towards that hay bale. I'll have receding hay bales in the scene pulling the viewer back, and then the motion of these clouds sweeping and curving the viewer up and out to the left. So now I'm going to be adding that sunlight. Now in the reference image, the sun seemed to be kind of above, to the left, and behind the viewer, but I wanted to make my sunset on the horizon, low on the horizon line. That's why I added that bit of gold there. Now, I know this is a speed version. Like I said, my Patreon version is all real time with full commentary, but I think you'll get lots of little artistic painting nuggets in this lesson as well. Now, let me show you this other little set when I'm using it. It's the Paul Rubens 40 set, and I love this set. It's got a lot of nice dark colors. It's got some neutral colors in it. It's not really a standalone set, but it's a great accessory. It's got some nice darks in it, dark browns that I'm using here. And like I said, they behave and apply very much like Sennelier pastels, which is pretty amazing considering their low price. I'll, again, have all of the links in the description of this video for these products. So as you can see, I'm just using the very simple rules of light and shadow here. I have repositioned my sun to the lower horizon in the distance. Therefore, I know the sun is backlighting this hay bale. So that's why I have my shadows on the underneath side and shadows on the ground behind the hay bales. And I'm just giving a little bit of value to these to represent a backlit scene. And it's amazing how quickly form and a three-dimensional feel can start to develop. Now I'm using this dark pastel to get in these plow lines. Now I've seen these machines behind one of our properties where they actually bale up the hay, and it's so fun to watch. But they leave these lines, and they work so wonderfully in this composition as focal elements to draw the viewer in. Now I've given my field a few levels. You might be able to see little horizontal linear divisions. I didn't want it to be so flat, so I'm going to use value and color to make a few levels of gently rolling hills in the scene, just to give some interest to this composition. And now it's time to add a lighter value yellow to the oranges I had already put down. And I work in typical fashion like I do with many other elements in a painting. I like to get my darker values down first, even if it's not really dark. I like oranges instead of going for a white. That's what I would have done when I first started pastel painting. I like to go ahead and get in the darker values that's going to give some value contrast to the lightest light that I eventually put down. I will be adding a lighter yellow soon. So I'm just kind of carving in, working around my negative spaces in my sky, and now I'm starting to develop some of these clouds. And my clouds are going to be a reflection of the warmth that I've already put down low on the horizon. In other words, I have some oranges and pinks in the setting sun area. They're going to radiate upward and catch that color and value onto the underside of these clouds. And this phase is called blocking in. Notice I'm not getting stuck on any one area for very long. I'm trying to get my surface covered with the main basic values and colors. And I'm using this darker value of brown to get on this rolling side of the hill in the foreground here, the lowest part, and in the hay bale some. But it's because this hill is rolling downwards. Therefore, it's going to be more in shadow. The sun's not quite going to reach and get around that hill. So I do the same thing to each level of hill in the landscape. You'll see me do that in a minute. And I'm adding some of this warmth to some of the trees. Some of those trees are going to catch some of the warmth from that sun. Now the top part of the hill is catching a little bit of that light. So I'm just scumbling in some of that value and on the top of the hay bale and the hay bales that are receding into the distance to give the impression of the light from the sun catching on the tops of things that are higher, and catching some of that light from the sun. Now, I will be adding a really light and bright, beautiful backlighting to this hay bale as I work, and you'll see that more towards the end. Now, I got a darker pastel here to get in really some of the darkest places in this painting. I know that value contrast, meaning something light next to something dark, gets focal point attention always in a painting. If you have, a painting that's just got a lot of middle values and you have something really dark next to something really light, our eye's going to go to that. And I want this hay bale to be that element. So I'm going to have a dark underneath part, dark where I'm working right now. I'm just trying to get some of those cylindrical elements in there, and my lightest backlighting on the top of that hay bale. And now I've even got a little pretty green. It's just a little hint of a green, a little neutral. And I just thought the value worked great for this, and it just gave a little color interest as well. So I'm doing kind of a similar application of color and value to each hay bale. And now I've got a little bit more saturated. It's still not highly saturated orange color. The warmth from that sun is casting across this field, reaching even to the viewer level, and just catching on some of those, again, higher elements in the scene. I add a little bit of the same color around the hay bale, but I'm being careful not to bring it too far around to the shadow side. Now is when I'm going to really turn on the sunshine, and this is a little yellow that I chose from the Sennelier set. I don't even have to make a circle. It's more just a mark. It actually looks more realistic if you just kind of make a little mark. And I made a few little squiggly lines out from it. And again, I'm just giving a little warmth to the areas of these little levels of hills, the top sides of them, to give that feeling of light and shadow. Now, I'm using a pretty little green. I could have just gone with the warmth, and many times a painting can go multiple ways, but I'm using this as an example to demonstrate to you how the point of this video, color temperature rules can change when we've got a low setting sun on the horizon. Now, as I paint here, let me describe that to you. Color temperature in general gets cooler as we go into the distance in a landscape. For example, trees in the foreground will appear green and darker. Typically, values are darker in the foreground. But as tree bands and levels recede into the distance, they get cooler. You can kind of make your greens a little more teal and a little bluer, actually. Now, I know I'm painting the sky while I'm describing this principle. Again, my Patreon version has everything that I'm doing right here. But I want you to keep in mind what I'm talking about here, because in a minute, I'm going to seemingly break the rules of color temperature with respect to these distant trees. And I'm going to show you that in just a second, but I wanted to point out I've got most of my painting blocked in now. I've got most of the elements and the colors and values on the surface. Now, I've got a little rosy colored pastel, and I am going to lightly glaze this rosy color, it's a little brownish rosy color, on the tops of these distant trees. Typically, in a landscape, I would cool these trees off in the distance. Now, why do you think they'd be warmer in this scene? Well, it's because the sun is right there casting its warm light onto the trees and even onto the distant land. That's why I add some warmth in the landscape, flat part of the land, even further away. Now, if you're really new to painting and color temperature, I have a very simple video that should really help you to understand this concept and how it works in a typical landscape with the sun a little higher from the horizon line. And in this lesson, I really break down the rules of color temperature and even value, and I think it's really great for beginner artists. And this image here shows you how color temperature typically, when a sun is higher in the horizon, elements get cooler as they recede into the distance. That's why mountains often look blue or purple in the distance. So that's a really basic lesson, and this lesson is a bit of an exception to the rule. And I often like to encourage the beginner artist because I was there. I did not know what I was doing. I've literally learned almost everything I know online from videos or other artists sharing. And it was a bit overwhelming at times. And I think that's why I just love to teach about how a lot of this is just common sense. Things just obey the laws of physics typically. And when there's an exception like this one, it's pretty logical to realize that the warmth from the sun right near the elements in the low horizon like this is going to have an influence on them. I'm going to show you a few other little pastels. I forgot to mention at the beginning of this video, I just used a few of these Prismacolor new pastels that are the little harder sticks like I did the sketch with, just to get a little bit of linear mark making around the sun and the setting sun area. And I have many other videos that talk about color temperature, how it works in a typical landscape. So you can try to check those out. And right here is where I'm adding the warmth, the backlighting to this main focal point hay bale. And I'm using my little Prismacolor new pastels here just to capture some little quick gestural linear marks in a light warm value, like the sun is just catching on a few of those little straw pieces sticking out. And I give a little bit of that textural feeling to some of the hay bales as they recede into the distance. But keep in mind, the further away they get, the less detail you're going to see. You just barely make a mark. So again, this was really fun making this hay bale have such beautiful backlighting. Now, I don't often do this, soften a sky like I'm doing here, but I'm using a piece of pipe foam insulation. There's multiple products you can use to blend with. And, you know, in hindsight, I'm wondering if I should have left the sky more textural and continued to develop some of the clouds. But I'm always playing around myself as an artist. And I knew I wanted to add these stars at the end. So I'm gonna be sharing that in just a minute. But I wanted to soften the sky. My concept was to give the hay bale even more focal point attention. All right, now I'm finally adding a little bit of green to some of these foreground trees, and I've jumped ahead here. I got a little carried away with some of my mark making in my grasses, and my lighting changed in my studio. That's why the lighting appears a lot different here. I don't know what happened, but maybe I turned the lights out. I don't even know. But here I'm adding some focal interest. This is more about what I talk about in my Patreon video of making the image your own, telling your story. And I thought these almost like wheat grasses growing up and pointing the viewer. This is a focal point strategy called convergence. I call it pointing. And I am just using them to enhance the composition, to give a little drama and interest and foreground attention, pulling the viewer in. And just, you know, again, telling my story. This is what I felt when I saw the reference image, was just the glory of the heavens, but these elements almost praising the Lord and celebrating life and this glorious sunset. And I also want to show you my simple and easy application of stars. Now, my filming got a little out of the scene here, but I'm not using a white. I'm using kind of a baby blue light pastel, and I'm just making a little mark in some areas and kind of wiping it off with my finger. Not with all of them, but just a few. But notice how I'm just barely tapping in some areas. I want that to feel like there are stars so far away, and also randomness, random sizes, random spacing, like you see in the heavens. We don't see all of the stars the same size or the same shape. And I even gave a hint of some stars just kind of peeking through some of those thinner, wispy clouds. Now, some of my marks are a little bit more purposeful, and I want to place those in areas that enhance the composition. So I have those mostly in the kind of sweeping upwards to the left to pull the viewer, almost like that S-shaped curve I have going with the composition. I hope you learned so much in this condensed version of my longer Patreon lesson and a little nugget of color temperature theory that you might can use when you are painting a landscape scene with a low setting sun. Please leave me a comment if any of these tips helped you, and even some ideas of future videos. I love to hear your thoughts. All right, everyone, as always, God bless and happy painting.